I'll preface this by saying it was an accident. I was 11 years old and had gotten into the tinkering phase kids go through, and I was fiddling with my brakes, gears, etc. I went on a ride to a super steep hill that was really popular to test my creation. As I was blasting down the hill, the nut that secures the handlebars jostles loose, and I lose all semblance of control. I can remember the car coming towards me from the opposite direction, but after that I hit the ground. The car swerved to miss me and went straight into a tree, killing the whole family, mom, dad and 2 sons. I lived in an extremely small town and the aftermath was horrible. Long after the candlelight vigils, that I still see in my nightmares, and memorials ended, I and my family were bullied, harassed and generally shunned. Kids can be horrible, but as a child I understood that. But the adults of the town, they were cruel. They called me MK, murder kid. By age 13 I attempted suicide. After a lengthy hospital stay, my family had to move across the state out of the town. We went generations back in. I'm all grown now and only recently felt safe going back there and to the hill that changed everything, part of my continuing therapy. The worst part about it is at the spot where they died there is a perfectly maintained cross and flowers bearing their names. Someone still mourns them, brings flower and clears the weeds away. I was not prepared for that. It ripped open any feelings of closure I had. In my head, it was over for everyone but me. It wasn't. So how do I live now? One day at a time. There are good ones and bad ones, but not a day goes by that I don't think about it. It is like living with a disfigurement, perhaps that biblical mark of Cain? I feel others can see it in my eyes the same way I can. I was 13 years old living in Norway. Growing up I loved climbing trees, so me and my friends would climb the tallest ones we could find. Our town in Norway was quite small and quite high in elevation, so the best trees were down towards the river. We decided to get together one Friday and head down to the river to do some climbing. We always took a backpack with lunch and snacks and water with us so we could hang out in our tree until dark. It was my friend's younger brother, 11, who was carrying the backpack full of snacks, and I was carrying the backpack full of drinks. My friend's younger brother was not as used to climbing trees as we were. But like any little brother, he wasn't about to let that stand in his way and prevent him from hanging out with his big brother and his best friend. As it was a rare occurrence, we'd let him hang out with us. We were almost to the part of the tree where there was a spot for us to all be able to sit. I got there first and I hung my backpack up on a tree branch. I then told my friend's little brother to pass me his backpack so I could hang it on the branch and make it easier for him to get to where I was. While he was passing me his backpack, his foot slipped off the branch and he didn't have the upper arm strength to carry his own weight yet. He fell the whole way down the tree, landed in the river onto jagged rocks and was killed instantly. My friend and I were out of that tree faster than I even thought it was possible, and what we saw that day changed us forever. All he wanted to do was hang out with his big brother and do what the big kids were doing. I feel like if I never told him to pass me his backpack, we'd all be in a tree right now drinking a beer thinking back on all our ventures. But instead, my best childhood friend can no longer be in the same room as me. I have not heard from him or his family in over 10 years, and every single day of my life they pop into my mind and I remember what I did. Everyone tells me it wasn't my fault and it could have happened to anyone, but that doesn't erase the guilt I feel about asking for that stupid backpack. If anyone has a chance to read this and if you are going to get anything from my story, it's that anything can happen, anywhere at any time. And tell those you love, that you love them, because you never know when someone will ask for their backpack. People say euthanizing is illegal for humans in the US, but as a nurse, when I have palliative orders, they are to give narcotics and benzos every 5 minutes as needed. You bet they're given every 5 minutes. I have killed people. They were about to die, and I hope that I took their pain away in the process, but the drugs I have given take that pain away and contribute to their death at the same time. That being said, I have never done this without an order from a physician or without family consent. Throw away anyway just in case someone decides to pick a bone. I am a locomotive engineer. I drive trains. 13 times in my 19-year career, so far. Someone ended up in front of my train that didn't survive. Suicide, poor judgment or no sense of situational awareness combined with a vehicle that takes a mile or more to stop equals death about 50% of the time in my experience. The nightmares of various incidents awaken me regularly. Pretty sure that I suffer PTSD, but if I do something about it, I will lose my job, medically disqualified. I cannot let that happen at the moment as financial ruin would result. Please, stay out of the path of my freight train. I was the driver in a car accident with my 3 best friends. The 3 of them died. I survived, somehow. Just writing that makes me nauseous today. And I say today because every day is different. Some days I can talk about it or write about it and I'm okay, and some days I just want to go back in bed and cry and scream. And today apparently is one of those days. The thing is though, you never really know until something triggers you, and I hate that word, and it leads you into a spiral. When I was around 6, I had a habit of sleeping on the stairs. One day my sister, who is currently pregnant, was going down the stairs, ended up tripping over me and fell down, hard. She ended up miscarrying. I guess it's not killing someone in a traditional sense, but in a way I did kill my unborn niece or nephew. I never really got over it. It was and still is horrifying to me. I was 12 when it happened, and as much as it was a pure accident, my life was better afterward. My mom and I were living with her boyfriend at the time. This man was a drunk and an abuser. I came home one day from school to find him beating my mom down in the kitchen. I had never even thought about standing up to this guy. He was above 6 feet 3 inches and very broad, but that day I came home from school made me summon all the courage. I had to save my mom. As I ran over to them, I grabbed a fork off the table and stabbed him just below his shoulder on the back. It scared him so much that he had a heart attack and died on the floor. I was supposed to get up and check on my mom. She'd been fighting cancer for 4 years and it had been the majority of my mid-20s, spent my time on her, left college, etc. She was planning on getting up and driving herself to her DRS that day, but I usually check on her because she can have bad days. I overslept. It was nearly 11 a.m. and I woke to a phone call from my dad, saying the DRS hadn't seen her. I checked upstairs in her room, the kitchen, nothing. Then I saw the bathroom door open a crack. What was in there was basically half a mummy on the floor and feces everywhere mixed with vomit. I don't know what happened, but I called 911 without stepping foot in the bathroom. Hello, 911? My mom's dead. The flat pan explanation caught the poor guy off guard completely. I mean, I guess I was in shock, but not really that shocked, you know? He was in a full panic. I followed along and pretended to perform CPR. Her eyes were white, she was covered in vomit, ice cold and drained like a mummy. Sometime later, I don't have an idea for time and perspective, it was all moving very slowly. The paramedics showed up. We're a small town, everyone knew us. I'm in my underpants, and the lead paramedic is a good friend from high school. The awkward exchange was not something I forget. They pretended to do CPR for about 30 seconds, then get a command to keep working on it in the truck. I messaged him on Facebook later to ask if that was a show, which it was obviously. He said basically, "We always do on deceased at the scene." This was all difficult but just a gory version of expectation. The next part haunts me. I had to call my dad back. He ran home from work. He ran around the house getting her things. He wanted to make sure we had her medical info for the ER doctors and her medication list. I kept trying to explain we wouldn't need it. I kept trying to keep him in this world. I was too much of a coward. I was speaking in riddles, I couldn't do it. We get to the ER, move to a small room with cheap furniture you only find in rooms where they tell you people die. The doctor came in, and addressed him directly in what must have been at most 4 sentences. And then stared at him after "I'm sorry." It was like he had been run over by a car. He just sobbed into his hands for what felt like hours. He got up without a word and left the room. I found him nearly half an hour later pacing in the parking lot. We decided to get drunk. My fiancée, now wife, found us somehow 2 hours later 2 blocks away at a bar. To this day I don't know how. She must have checked every bar in town. A total mess. She sat with us for hours. My dad now has a girlfriend. He thinks I hate him for that, but I don't. He's earned whatever happiness he can find. He pushed through the hardest 4 years of their lives and tried to single-handedly beat cancer with no medical knowledge and no resources. He can be called a lot of bad things in his life, but for 4 years he showed me what character is. I just wish I could have been more courageous. It was my place to tell him, not that doctor. When I was young I used to get bullied a lot. I was in the 9th grade and I had this one person, a senior, that would harass me, and sometimes hit me, constantly. I always tried to just ignore it, but I had to walk outside to get to one of my classes and he knew about it. Not a lot of people were around us. We were on the sidewalk, walking down a hill towards the AG barn. He pushed me and I fell down the hill a little, but caught myself. I got angry. Angrier than I normally get. I got so angry that for the first time, I pushed him back. Instead of falling to the side, or not falling at all, like I thought he would, he fell right off the sidewalk, onto the road, for student parking and buses, and fell in front of a bus. There was a few people watching and I called the police afterwards. I know he was bullying me. But I have nightmares about what I did still. Because of what the people who saw said, and the camera outside the building, luckily I never suffered any consequences. But I almost wish I had. Not sure if this counts, but when I was a truck driver, in training actually, I had the misfortune to be the tool someone else used to commit suicide. We were driving late at night on US 277 between Piedras Negras and Del Rio. It's kind of the armpit of Texas, flat, straight, boring, right near the border. I was at the wheel, my driver mentor was in his bunk, but awake chatting with me. I saw headlights ahead, a long way off. Didn't think anything of it. After a while, they got close, and it looked like they went to turn left, only there wasn't a road there. Then they straightened out and drove right into us head-on. I had just enough time to see that it was a Tacoma, and the driver was male. All I could do was let go of the steering wheel and hit the brakes. We were busted up pretty badly, but we cut that pickup in two. I had a broken wrist, my mentor had a bunch of broken ribs and a bruised liver. We got out to see the damage and when we walked to the rear I saw a work boot sitting on the double yellow line, with about 6 inches of leg sticking out. I still get an odd feeling in my stomach when I think about it. Obviously, I didn't plan to kill the guy. And there wasn't much I could do without foreknowledge, semis aren't exactly nimble. But it still takes a bit to tell yourself you couldn't have done something else. He had a young wife and 2 little girls. I was working out of town, which is pretty common in my line of work, touring with bands. We had just started a new tour with an artist, but as a crew a bunch of us had been working for several artists over the last few years. When you work these long hours, sometimes under ridiculous pressure and circumstances, and live on a tour bus, sleeping a few feet away from 11 other grown adults, one of 2 things happen. You just get in with it, drink away any sadness you have from being so exhausted and missing your family and friends because you haven't seen them in months. Or you become incredibly close, like a family. You're together through everything, long incredibly hard days, or experiencing the joy of something or somewhere new. On this particular tour, it was going to be a smaller group of us than the last tour. No need for a video technician. But we really liked the video technician. We had done a year or 2 together, and he was a really great kid. Always saw the bright side of everything. You could always count on him to have a smile on his face, no matter how many hours we had been working. Lucky for the tour, more video equipment was added, and so he came out to join us right as we were going into rehearsals for the tour. We went through a week of rehearsals, then took a ferry to Victoria from Vancouver, to start the tour. First show done, we all had such a great time, a really easy first day, load in, the install, went quickly, the show went off without a hitch, and we finished a few hours earlier than we expected. We went back to the hotel to get some food and have a drink. Our rooms were next to each other. It was a nice spring night, we sat outside on our adjoining balconies. He was a wine expert, he loved red wine. I had an unopened bottle of red in my room, and he had an unopened bottle of white in his room, which he knew I liked. He leaned over his railing to pass me a bottle, which I easily grabbed from him, the balconies were so close together. So I passed him the bottle of red from my room. But he slipped, on the wet balcony. After this point, I have no memory of any sounds. But everyone on the tour staying on that side of the hotel, heard me screaming. I saw him go over the railing. I saw him hit the side of the hotel. And I saw him land, 50 feet below me. I ran to the elevator, yelled at the front desk to call 911 on my way past. But it was too late. It wouldn't have mattered. I got to him, and looked into his eyes and they were lifeless. A large piece of the back of his head was a few feet from us. I held his hand and sobbed that I was sorry, until a security guard pulled me off. From that day, we were a tour family, connected by the worst bond imaginable. I was 19. I went over to my girlfriend's house one Saturday morning and we hung out until around 4 p.m. She was going over to her friend's house to go swimming but I had other plans so I didn't go. Her mom asked her to take a bag of trash to the dump when she went, so I told her I'd follow her to the dump and throw it out since it was on my way. I pulled in behind her at the dump. I grabbed the bag out of the back, she was driving her dad's truck because she didn't want trash in her car, and I tossed it in the dumpster. I banged on the truck bed twice to let her know she could go, and said bye. I realized after I left I didn't say love you like I usually did, so I sent her a text. She didn't answer me back, so I just assumed she didn't hear the phone. Her dad's truck had loud exhaust, so it made sense. I lived about 40 minutes away. When I walked in my front door, I got a phone call from her mom. She was in a panic. She told me there had been a wreck. My girlfriend was alive, but she was being flown by helicopter to VCU Medical Center in Richmond, Virginia. I ran to my car and I didn't take my foot off the accelerator until I got to her parents' house. We got in her mom's car and made the 2-hour drive to Richmond. When we arrived, we walked into the emergency department and went to the front desk. Her dad told the receptionist who he was looking for. At the same time, a doctor was standing behind the counter. The receptionist said the name wasn't in the system, so she spun around and asked the doctor. He walked out, introduced himself, asked a few questions to confirm who we were, then he said she was dead. I was standing by a wall. I fell back against it, and slid down to the floor, where I sat for a while in pure disbelief. Her parents went down the hall to talk to someone about something. I walked outside and sat beside a big column and smoked a cigarette. I called my parents. It didn't seem like I sat there very long, but I'm sure it was at least 3 to 4 hours. I just sat there. There are no words to describe the kind of hurt. Most of the next few weeks are missing from my memory. I just laid in my bed and cried. I didn't eat, and I didn't sleep. I just cried and stared at the wall. I cried until there were no more tears left, and cried some more. I weighed 160 before she died. I weighed 120 pounds a month and a half after she died. I know it was hard on my parents watching me like that. My mom tried to get me to eat. I wouldn't. They tried to get me to get out of bed. I wouldn't. They even called a pastor to come talk to me. I told him to go F himself. There was nothing that could console me. The love of my life was dead, and I sent the text message that killed her. One day, I just snapped out of it. I got up to go to the bathroom and I saw my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized my own face. I knew I had the choice to move on with my life, or I'd be dead myself. I'm from a small town, so the only thing for young people to do was hang out in the Walmart parking lot. I got dressed, and drove to Walmart. I saw a few people I knew, so I stopped and talked to them. From then on, I spent every evening hanging out in the parking lot. The cops would come around and kick us out, so we'd find somewhere else to park and hang out some more. A year later, we got kicked out of the lot by the cops one night, so we decided to go to somebody's house and drink some beer. We all made phone calls and invited people we knew. It was there, at my friend's house, that I met my next girlfriend. 2 years later, we got married. This month we celebrate our 7th anniversary. We have 2 beautiful children, and I've never been happier. I know time heals all wounds is a really worn-out cliché, but it's true. A couple years ago, I was digging through my mom's cedar chest looking for my birth certificate, and found a newspaper clipping from the accident. The newspaper said other motorists reported she swerved to miss a dog, overcorrected and flipped the truck. I never knew that was the cause. Knowing that it wasn't, my text message lifted a huge burden, but I still don't text. I made the incredibly difficult decision to sign a DNR for my 3-year-old son. He suffered from multiple physical and intellectual disabilities. He spent the majority of his life in and out of the pediatric inpatient units. Eventually, I became so sad at the thought of his suffering and continual downhill slide, that I made the decision to do no more. I took him home from the hospital, and about 2 weeks later he went into respiratory distress and died. I held him for 16 hours as he struggled to breathe, and I remember begging the hospice nurse to keep giving him the morphine and Ativan to end it because my heart couldn't take it anymore. I know I didn't physically kill him, but I still made the mental decision to do so. It hurts each and every day. I was driving on a small treacherous mountain road and my brakes went out. My friend talked me through it and I was able to stop my truck by easing into the mountainside at 55 miles per hour. The truck flipped and rolled and landed on the edge of a cliff. My friend's head was crushed during the roll. He tried to breathe but his neck was broken. He died as I was trying to talk to him. I killed 2 kids in Afghanistan. They almost killed me. They were maybe 12. Their Taliban uncle had pumped them full of drugs and sent them to attack us to get killed so the village would be against us. F that guy. I still see their faces in my dreams, and it was 7 years ago. They were not the only people I killed. The most disturbing are those 2 kids. The saddest was 2 little girls, maybe 3 and 5, killed by a stray artillery round during a firefight. Their family was just farmers trying to raise food to survive. We found a brick of hash and a hash pipe in one of their pockets. Doubtful that they were destined for a life of misery, most people are happy there, until the Taliban comes in and messes their things up. Similar to the others here, I was the driver in a car crash. Slid on some black ice on the freeway. Spun a few times before getting T-boned by an SUV going full speed. Friend in the passenger seat busted up his head in the windshield, my brother behind me fractured his skull, and my best friend in the passenger side back seat died. My friends, at the time, used humor to get through things. I have a dark sense of humor, but they consistently went too far and I ended up leaving all my close friends. For years after, I had to go to court because of other cars that were affected by the crash, and my friend's mom was trying to sue me for more money than the $100K my insurance already paid out. I used to scream out in my sleep. I dropped out of college shortly after and attempted suicide. Much better now, but 5 years later and I still get anxiety when it snows. A car ran a stop sign right in front of me one night when I was heading back from a friend's house. I drilled it going at about 50 miles per hour. Everything went dark, and when I came to, I was facing the opposite way on the other side of the road I'd been traveling down. I kicked my door open, got out, and it was the most powerful sense of derealization I've ever felt. I was totally out of body, just standing quietly in the middle of the street on a peaceful summer night. Glass everywhere. My Ford Explorer in front of me just destroyed beyond belief. I start coming to my senses and hear a car horn. I look around and realize it's coming from the car I hit, so I start sprinting as fast as I can toward it. I get up close and see that the driver's side is totally crushed, the window shattered. I look inside and there's an elderly man face down against the steering wheel, laying on the horn, blood all over the place. To this day I can't play GTA at all because of that particular feature. I start shaking him like crazy and yelling, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" There's no response. So I pull his body back toward the car seat away from the wheel. And it's an old woman, not a man. Completely dead, face smashed up. Someone's mother and grandmother just lifeless and maimed sitting right in front of me. Most terrible image. Just totally terrifying and numbing to see something like that. I stumble down the street and up toward the closest house and knock on the door. This woman answers in her pajamas and I can't even talk straight or anything. I'm just crying hysterically at this point and finally get out that there's been a bad wreck. By this time people are pulling over and pouring into the street. I remember the emergency responders having to use the jaws of life to get her body out of the car. And then my mom showing up and seeing my car and holding her hands on her head and yelling "Oh my God" over and over, as though she couldn't even grasp what had happened at all. As far as aftermath, I think about it maybe once every 3 to 4 months now. I have a ton of repressed memories from youth, and that's another one that is buried pretty deep. I don't feel a sense of guilt per se, as I was obeying the speed limit and did everything I could, but I still tear up now and then thinking about some kid losing his or her grandmother that way. Or someone losing their mother like that. Or an old man losing his wife and best friend in such a horrible manner that late in life. I just hope she immediately passed away on impact and didn't feel any pain, didn't suffer at all. She was turning 13, I was 13 turning 14. It was her birthday and a group of us went to an old power plant to explore. I had asked her to go out with me earlier that day. It was hilariously awkward and now it's bittersweet. Our friends stayed on the ground floor and she and I crawled up to the 3rd floor to make out, but we were just going to tell everyone we did. I was too advanced and she was a good girl, from the nice part of town. After 10 minutes of edging along the wall she let go of my hand and tried to crawl over to a window to look out. It's taken me years to get past that moment and think clearly about what happened. I heard a yelp and a crack that still makes me nauseous today. I can't watch videos of a skater falling, or Hostel or Saw. I crawled down to her and all of our friends ran off to get help. I remember being pissed that no one was helping. I was trying to do CPR or something to save her life. The cops found us and I was covered in blood. I've been told it's not my fault, her parents still blame me. We went to court for a few times and my saint of a public defender was able to argue out of manslaughter charges. I'll post this because I don't usually talk about it in my life, but here I don't feel alone. I was 9 years old and my brother, 11 years old, and we were pretty close, but after moving to a new state he wanted to have his own friends. Feeling left out, I decided I wanted to be part of this friendship he had just developed. Quick backstory. My brother and I were seen as outcasts in New Jersey moving from a southern state and it wasn't easy adjusting. He had just made a best friend, Ricky, who was the top of the class, star Pee Wee QB, and all-around loved kid. They decided to go for a bike ride down to the local reservoir where most kids would hang out. I followed them after specifically being told by my brother to stay behind. They ended up leaving their bikes behind and hiking around a dangerous overpass by the waterfall, and ended up finding me trailing them not too far behind. As upset as my brother was, he knew we were too far in the journey to turn back, and reluctantly accepted the fact that he couldn't enjoy his bonding experience without me being a nuisance. Less than a few minutes later, after me constantly slipping on the rocks that were extremely close to tragedy, we decided to wash the mud off of our shoes. Ricky decided it was too dangerous for me to wash my shoes and took the task himself to protect me. In less than a blink of an eye, Ricky was gone. Vanished into thin air. The police recovered his body days later, and my brother was seen as a murderer and that weird kid who killed our beloved son by the whole town. The pain that doesn't go away rots my mouth, knowing he will never be happy because I took the only hope we had away from him. Being poor and helpless kids, I took my brother's light at the end of the tunnel, and dimmed it for good. My brother and I are still close, but he and I both know that day changed our lives forever. If only I listened to my big brother, life as we know it wouldn't be the same. 1995, was living with my druggy mother and sister who was 4 years older than me. My mom worked at a bar and as a 7-year-old kid I lived half my time in that bar. We did have a house that was more of a shed on a lot that was converted into a house. Well, my mom got close with one of the patrons who also drank a lot and did drugs. Well, one day she broke up with him I guess, and he kept coming over threatening her. A few days later she gets a call from him, not sure what was said, but she tries to hurry us into the back room where we kept our clothes. She attempts to hide us all under the clothes, but I start freaking out and tried to leave the house. As I get to the front door a truck pulls in. I stop and hear him get out, screaming for my mother. He tries to get in the door at first and fails. I'm about 3 feet to the side of the front door. He shoots at the door. I freaking jump on the top of the couch that is right next to the door while also grabbing my T-ball bat. He kicks and kicks at the door and it finally opens. He walks in and I pound him right in the forehead. He instantly goes out. I scream, and my mom finally comes out with my sister and we both leave, then call the police at the bar. That same night I went to go live with my father permanently as my mother had arrest warrants. I didn't know until I was about 16 that he had ended up dying in the hospital between a concussion and alcohol poisoning. I don't feel bad about it though.